Thank you, Caitlin. As Caitlin said, another way oysters are brought into the Sound is through oyster aquaculture. This picture shows an oyster aquaculture facility in Roanoke Sound. Oyster aquaculture, sometimes referred to as mariculture or oyster farming, is growing oysters in structures that either rest on the bottom of a water body or float at the water's surface. Oyster aquaculture can happen in a variety of ways. You can spread oyster seed along the bottom of a body of water where the oysters mature, or you can suspend the oysters off the bottom of the body of water through the use of cages, racks, bags, or trays. These containers can be placed either at the surface of the water, raised slightly off the bottom, or suspended in the water column. In this slide, the top picture shows floating oyster cages and the bottom picture shows an oyster rack that could be placed at the bottom of the body of water. And we have an example here of a floating oyster bag. Another difference between oyster aquaculture and wild oysters, or restoration oysters, is triploid oysters versus diploid oysters. Oyster aquaculture frequently uses triploid oysters. Triploid oysters are sterile. They are specifically bred for oyster aquaculture. Since triploid oysters cannot reproduce, they do not have a spawning season, they're harvestable all year long, and they are able to reach full maturity much quicker than diploid oysters. This also means that oyster aquaculture farmers have to purchase new seed every year. Wild oysters are diploid oysters and are able to reproduce. Visually, triploid oysters are no different than diploid. So looking at this picture on the slide, these oysters could be diploid oysters. The industry in North Carolina has been slow to grow. In North Carolina, the oyster aquaculture industry has been slow to grow, especially in comparison to other coastal states. Other industries have seen a rapid growth over the past decade. The number of aquaculture oysters sold by Virginia increased from 800,000 in 2005 to over 28 million in 2012. As shown in the graph in this slide, Virginia has had a revenue growth of over $9 million over a 7-year period. Of Virginia's $9.5 million in sales in 2012, 74% were to out-of-state buyers. North Carolina's oyster aquaculture industry was worth around $600,000 in 2012. Oyster aquaculture is also heavily regulated in North Carolina. In 1993, North Carolina created a moratorium on new shellfish leases in Core Sound, making it more difficult to obtain leases to do oyster aquaculture in certain parts of the Sound. This moratorium was lifted this past September. Another regulation on the aquaculture industry came in March of 2012 with a nationwide permit from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that strove to prevent harm to submerged aquatic vegetation, or SAV. In North Carolina, this permit has been interpreted so that oyster aquaculture leases are not issued for any areas in which there is submerged aquatic vegetation. Some of these regulations may be revisited in the next few years, however, the nationwide permit is set to expire in March of 2017, and more recently, legislation has been open to changes. So using all of this information on oysters and oyster aquaculture, we created a research question. We divided our research into two main parts, natural science and social science, to look at the ecological and social impacts of oyster aquaculture. And now to the research. Claire is going to start us off with our natural science.